Story 1. I work at a large tech company. People think we are super data-driven, which is true in some ways. But a lot of times decisions are made simply because someone wants to get promoted or a leader has a biased hunch not based on the data at all. My hunch is that this is very common. Story 2. Using electronic benefits transfer, food stamps, supplemental nutrition assistance program benefits, etc. I work at a grocery store and I could not possibly tell you how many customers have to use some sort of assistance for paying for their food. It is incredibly common, but there is still such a stigma around it that breaks my heart. People will try to hide the card and swipe as fast as possible. And I want to just tell them they are the 10th person this hour alone that has come through my line with an electronic benefits transfer card. It is okay. Life is hard and expensive. Story 3. Having some kind of long-term medical condition or other health problem. Pretty well, absolutely everyone will develop something at some point, even if it is well managed and in remission or nearly invisible. It doesn't have to lead to visible disability either. Story 4. Chronic procrastination is more common than we realize. It's not just laziness. There's often deeper stuff like fear of failure, perfectionism, or anxiety that fuels it. Most people assume procrastinators just need more discipline, but it's often way more complex. Story 5. Incompetent medical professionals. There are a lot of people in medical fields who are just there for the paycheck and do only the absolute minimum required to get it, which often does not include doing what is best for the patient. Story 6. Addiction, whether it be drugs, alcohol, or gambling. Years ago, I was called for jury duty and made it to the final selection round of 20 people in the courtroom. The judge provided details of the case, which involved drug trafficking, and asked potential jurors if any of their experiences might cause a bias. I was shocked by how many people admitted to either having an addiction themselves or having a family member affected by it. Out of 20 people, 10 had a story. Story 7. Diamonds. The diamond industry syndicate simply restricts their supply on the market to make it appear that they are rare. Actually, emeralds and rubies are more rare. Story 8. Professional incompetence. On all levels, from cashiers at McDonald's to nuclear scientists, the difference is in how the organization handles and mitigates failure. Story 9. Imposter syndrome, that feeling like you're not good enough or that you're faking it, is surprisingly common. Even super successful people feel like they don't deserve their achievements, but no one talks about it because they assume they're the only ones who feel that way. Story 10. People who have genuine good intentions and act with kindness. Not everyone is strictly out for themselves. Many are, but there are many who are at least trying to be good people and care about the greater community of humanity. Story 11. Miscarriages during pregnancy. Up to 10% of pregnancies end in miscarriage in the first trimester. This is the reason for the tradition of waiting until the second trimester to announce a pregnancy. But so many people wrongly think a miscarriage is a source of guilt or shame. It is not. Story 12. Having a disability. In my work as a consultant for building accessibility, the pushback I get from people is often that disability only affects 1% of the population. In reality, it is more like 20 to 25%. About 1 in 4 or 5 people have some sort of disability. This is true across the world, regardless of which country you're looking at. Some have multiple disabilities as well. Once you include their friends and family who might spend time with or care for the disabled person, disability touches 40% of the population. Disability is much more common than people think. Disabled people make up the largest minority group in the world. It's strange. If you said 1 in 5 people for anything else, it's considered a lot of people. But for some reason, people don't think it's a lot or a big enough ratio to care about if the topic is disability. Story 13. When I was a nerdy, self-conscious boy growing up in the minority community I was raised in, I always looked up to the cool kids. When I finally worked my way up to being part of their group, I realized they were just as uncool as me. They had a lot of the same interests and were neurotic about the same things. This repeated itself in high school, college, and even as an adult. I turned 30 recently, and a couple of years back I dated this skater girl. Her friends were in their mid-20s and all skater kids. While my friends and I were artists, these mid-20-year-olds felt way cooler. Their art felt more real and fleshed out. They did street graffiti and were constantly making new music, whereas my friends and I were maybe working on a new thing here or there. They seemed so cool. I hung out with them one Pride weekend, and we sat there playing Cards Against Humanity, a game I last played with my nerdy engineering friends back in college. I realized cool people don't actually exist. As I interacted with many different groups of people from childhood to adulthood, I realized how common it is that literally everyone is neurotic and self-conscious about themselves. Everyone is into the same lame things, and at the end of the day, no one is cool. Story 14. Anecdotally, intrauterine device complications. The statistics make it sound so rare, but when I got mine, it felt like every woman in my life who's ever had one told me about it perforating their uterus. Then it happened to me, and even my obstetrician gynecologist had a story and told me she sees it all the time. So I kind of don't trust them anymore. Story 15. Pedophilia. My wife's father is a psychiatrist working with these people. That's why it's important to make a difference between pedophiles and pedophile predators. Story 16. In the United States, carrying a gun. On average, 1 in 8 people is carrying a concealed firearm at any given time. That means if you're in Costco and there are 200 people in there, 24 of them are carrying a gun. This number is substantially higher if you're in a red state. Most everywhere you go, aside from where it is expressly forbidden by law, there are likely to be multiple people carrying. Story 17. In the first year I was homeless. No one realized it. But then I started to notice a lot of people who were in the same situation as me. A lot of people. A lot. It's the invisible crowd. They are everywhere. In their fancy clothes, drinking their coffee nonchalantly right beside you, with their children by hand, in their nice cars, walking their dogs, everywhere. We just pretend not to see the final stage. The ragged, dirty, terminal ones. I believed, based on my own experience, that they represent at most 20% of the homeless people you encounter in your day. It's epidemic. Story 18. People being weird. The older I get, the more I realize that a lot of people are just really good at hiding the weird things they are into and that you never really know somebody. This guy I knew who seemed totally normal and like every other guy you would meet ended up being a furry. Story 19. Honestly, synesthesia. I have it and always thought I was weird until I learned about it in college. I found out quite a few people in my class experienced colors with numbers or could taste words. It made me feel way less alone about seeing numbers as specific colors my whole life. Story 20. It sounds obvious and silly, but death. I recently got an application that tells me anytime someone in my town dies, and I'm stunned how frequently it happens. Story 21. This question is being asked on this subreddit, like here and here and here and here. Story 22. Out of 5 women, my mom and us 4 girls, I was the only one who never endured a rape. My mom's previous rapes numbed her to the fact that my daughter had been molested while in her care, failing to recognize the urgency in responding to her distress. Under the incoming administration, I expect this to increase exponentially. Story 23. People have a more diverse sexuality than we think. We assume everyone is either black or white, straight or gay, although a large number of people are more in between. Story 24. Open relationships and swinging. The reason we do not know about it is that if people are smart, they are keeping it to themselves. Once you are in the lifestyle, though, people seem to come out of the woodwork everywhere. Story 25. People doing cocaine, laughing my ass off. I've never done it and never will, because I see how it can easily completely destroy someone's life. But for the past 5 years, I'm 22. I realize how actually common it is. People would always tell me it was common, but I never believed them until I saw with my own eyes that it was. Story 26. Colorblindness in women. Everyone thinks it only affects men, but here I am mixing up purple and blue constantly. Took me 23 years to find out because doctors kept dismissing the possibility since I'm female. Story 27. People that are pre-diabetic. 9 out of 10 people are in the pre-diabetic category, but without blood tests, most people would never find out they were, at least in the United States. Not sure about statistics outside of the United States. Story 28. Neurodevelopmental conditions like autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Many people think these conditions are overdiagnosed now, but they are actually still very much underdiagnosed. They are way more common than we originally thought, but due to a lack of awareness and understanding, many people have just gone undiagnosed. Story 29. Frauds, scams, liars, cheats, exploitation, slavery. The biggest offenders are the ones holding public and corporate offices at the highest level. The fact that many of them are revered says a lot about how sick our society is. Story 30. Bots posting and commenting on Reddit. There's an astonishing number now, and so many people don't seem to realize it because even the obvious, to me, bots will have tons of responses from people earnestly engaging. I recently was asked by a bot on here how to spot other bots. It's getting crazy. Story 31. Intrusive thoughts. It's way more common than people think, and therapists will say the same thing. Most people won't admit to it since it comes with a lot of shame. Story 32. The rate at which homicides are solved has steadily been declining from the 1980s to now. In the 1980s, 70% of homicides were solved, whereas today only about 47% of homicides are actually solved. So there is a good chance that if you're murdered, right now at least, there is a reasonable expectation that no one will ever find your killer. Story 33. Abuse. Even victims don't realize they are victims a lot of the time. They try to rationalize the behavior, especially if it's a parent emotionally abusing them. Victims not knowing they are victims is usually the answer to, why didn't they just leave? Because they didn't know. Story 34. Racism. It is already so common in most people. But working with older generations makes you realize just how racist they are. They always make snide remarks about anything that is not part of their culture. Story 35. Literally everything. If the odds of being struck by lightning and then winning the lottery are 1 in 100 million, then that means there are 82 people walking around that it happened to. Story 36. Child abuse. 1 in 4 is crazy, and a lot of it is done by parents, guardians, close relatives, and others. It warps my brain a little bit because I wonder what some people are like behind closed doors. Story 37. Being attracted to the underaged. But most people who feel it are civilized enough to realize that it's remnants of their obsolete caveman instincts and let the feeling come and go without acting on it. The people who follow that instinct aren't a small group either. You only need to visit certain remote places that don't have the cultural stigma, and it's considered normal. I learned it from a sociology course and didn't sleep well that night. Story 38. Places open on Christmas Day. Most people generally see it as a time when everything closes, but a surprising number of places are still open on December 25th. Story 39. Age-related illnesses kick in earlier now. There are so many young adults walking around with mental illness, cognitive decline, and early onset of dementia. Medicating themselves for mental illness has resulted in extremely poor levels of hygiene. One would think we are in a global war right now. These observations are from Sydney, Australia. An absolute dystopic hellhole. Story 40. Miscarriage. It's not so much that people think it doesn't happen often, but just that it's such a sensitive and hush-hush topic that most people simply aren't aware of just how common it is until it happens to them. Miscarriage likelihood is 33% in the first 3 to 4 weeks. 1/3. Story 41. Cognitive biases. We all use them every day naturally and unavoidably. Fun to research these. 80% of the time extremely helpful and important, 20% of the time erroneous and misguiding. This is how we function, and blessings to all today. Story 42. A lot more people are on antidepressants than you think. I remember when I joined a job, I mentioned it, and my manager laughed and said, "If only you knew how many of us are on something." Story 43. Gynecomastia is really common, with up to 70% of teen boys experiencing it, as well as an increased chance of it happening to men over 50, obese men, or those taking certain medications or with certain illnesses. So what is it? It's the excessive growth of breast tissue in boys and men due to a hormonal imbalance. If you're dealing with puberty, growing older, weight issues, mental health issues, or physical health issues, this is one more thing to add to the pile, and it can cause serious mental distress and dysphoria. Many feel like less of a man, even though it's a really common experience, so they isolate and self-conscious about their appearance, hide themselves away from friends, family, and partners.